While Zion Williamson's future is uncertain, trading CJ McCollum could redefine the Pelicans' trajectory. I'll tell you why it's crucial in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday. It's the day of the Joe Dumars introductory press conference. I will be there in person. We'll be covering it all probably live later on Tuesday night. We'll do a live show for everything to answer your questions from it. We're going to have a preview of that in the next segment here, the second segment of the show. I want to get into a variety of topics in the third segment, including Cooper Flagg declaring for the draft, Yves, Missi, something with Nico Harrison and the Mavs, which is mind-blowing to me. But we're going to start with trading away CJ McCollum and his value around the league, and maybe that's more imperative than the Zion Williamson uncertainty. So we'll get into that in a second here, because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So let's get into trading away CJ McCollum. You know, I think when you look at this team, and they're in a weird spot going into next year, there's talent on the roster. There was talent on the roster this year, but injuries derailed that more so than truthfully anything else. Just injuries, whether it's, you know, another hamstring injury for Zion Williamson, CJ missing time, Brandon Ingram rolling his ankle and then just never playing again in the regular season. You know, injuries to DeJounte Murray in two different times. They were going to be, we assumed good. We assumed good. And next year, even without Brandon Ingram, maybe the fit is a little bit better with Trey Murphy in the starting lineup. But you're also running into a problem where now there's no DeJounte Murray and he's not going to be ready to start the season. So how good are you going to be? So that puts the Pelicans, I think, in a weird spot. As we talked about yesterday, you don't want to become the Chicago Bulls and just kind of tread water and be a play-in tournament every year. You're either going to kind of bottom out and do a rebuild or just go for it, full send, go for it and be good. And with that injury to Murray and how much that's going to impact you next season, and I anticipate it will, puts them in a weird spot where, yeah, you could kind of just keep everything and maybe you're fighting for the, 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th seed at best. If not, falling just short of that and not ending up with, an incredible draft pick in what should be a pretty good draft next year. So what do you do here? And I think the move is you look at what CJ McCollum can get you. If you trade him away, can you reset your salary cap a little bit, because the Pelicans are in that state and it doesn't look like there's any reason they're going to pay the luxury tax next year, and they'll be pushing it again despite the trade of Brandon Ingram this year. So trading CJ can help you fix your books a little bit, but depending on where you fall in the draft, does trading CJ McCollum allow you to do that kind of full send? And maybe this is assuming that they're planning on keeping Zion Williamson, and we'll get more into that in the next segment here with what we want to hear or expect to hear from Joe Dumars at his introductory press conference. But if you trade away CJ McCollum and say the 6th pick, what could get you? If you land in the top 3, top 4, you do not move that pick almost under any circumstances, in my opinion. But if it's 6, 7, hopefully not 8, because that would be bad, even 5, and CJ McCollum, who next season is going to be making a little over $30 million per year, or just that one season, what could that get you? To the right team that's looking to go through their own reset, own rebuild, or maybe fix their own salary cap situation. CJ McCollum's on the final year of his deal next year. He becomes an expiring contract. That can be useful for teams trying to kind of fix their books a little bit. Something to keep in mind with the Pelicans too. Could you just let CJ McCollum expire or sign him to another extension that is well below $30 million? And I think the answer to that could be yes too. But if you're looking at, making a big move, there are some options in there. So what I kind of want to do is look at players that are making between, say, 25 to 40 million. That's probably the range you'd be looking at, for trading CJ McCollum. If you want to get up to that $40 million mark, you can include another contract or two in there to really make that work. What could CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins, and say the 6th pick overall get you? And I think there are some guys that are attainable in this list. So let's kind of start at the bottom and go up, looking at $25 million and up. I think below that, they're either too cost controlled that no team's really going to move on from one of those guys just because they are so cheap. Though keep an eye on someone like Colin Sexton, who's making $19 million next year, if this is a team that feels they need to add a point guard or a lead guard. And we'll talk more about him, I think, in the future here. But if you're looking at $25 million and up, I think the first two names that really jump out at you here are Miles Bridges and Nick Claxton. Miles Bridges from Charlotte and Nick Claxton from Brooklyn. I'm not the biggest Miles Bridges fan. He plays power forward, so if you're doing this around Zion Williamson, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good, but he's a 20-point per game scorer that rebounds at an all right rate and can play the 3 as well. Nick Claxton feels like a good type of player to put alongside Zion Williamson in the front court, someone that can go out and rebound at a pretty high rate and give you, 15 points per game in a larger role. The problem is he's never played above 30 minutes per game in his career, and that 6th pick feels like way too much to give up for someone like Nick Claxton in this draft. Nick Claxton's nice. Is he 6th pick nice? And I think the answer to that is kind of definitely no, in my opinion. So as you kind of work forward with it, it starts to get a little bit harder to find some type of players that could make a lot of sense for this team. Look, you go after Julius Randle at $31 million next year, but he had his time here in New Orleans. And while he and Zion would be fun, there's too much kind of overlap, I think, as a player with that sort of thing. I think when you start to look at Miami, depending on what happens to them in the postseason here, that's where things could get a little bit interesting. They're going to get bounced out in the first round, and they just seem like a team that is stuck kind of in that sense of you're an 8th seed every single year. You're fighting through the play-in tournament while they have Heat magic, and that can get them kind of far. Could you make a run at a guy like a Tyler Herro or even a Bam Adebayo? Bam Adebayo in the front court alongside Zion Williamson could shore up your center position, give you that rim protector and rebounder that you're looking for. Tyler Herro, if you just want some more scoring and a guard that commands attention, he's been absolutely outstanding this year and is probably a guy that should be in the running for most improved player. And Tyler Herro at $31 million doesn't really impact your books in a very negative way. So that's guys that I'm looking at. I think there's also, some people on Houston you could be looking at here too. Depending on what happens to them, if they get upset as the 2 seed by the Golden State Warriors and they looked awful offensively in the first round or in their game 1, could you go after someone like Alperen Şengün, who would fit perfectly next to Zion Williamson as a starting center? I don't really think that that's the guy that they're going to give up. But what about like a Jalen Green, who can kind of be boom or bust and potentially be your lead guard? His extension kicks in next year at $33.333 million. You also have a Jalen Suggs in Orlando at $35 million that I think makes sense as a defensive ace and kind of locks down your backcourt, giving you a point guard. He's just not like an elite scorer, and that lack of scoring, if you're giving up the 6th overall pick, and that's what we're using for this example, does kind of worry me when it comes to that. But maybe someone like Desmond Bane on the Memphis Grizzlies, who I love, is a 2-way player in my opinion. $36.7 million next year. He's under contract for 4 more years after that. If they get kind of bounced out, which it's looking like it's going to happen, just lost by 51, do they need more shooting? Do they need more offense? Do they want to try and trim some long-term salary? Because Desmond Bane makes 36.7, then 39.5, then 42, then 44.8. Is that something that they can kind of really afford? I think maybe, maybe not, but that's a name that you should kind of keep an eye on too to potentially get moved, along with LaMelo Ball. If Charlotte really wants to do a reset, trading LaMelo Ball for CJ McCollum on an expiring deal and the 6th pick makes a ton of sense there. I think New Orleans could kick the tires on a deal like that, but LaMelo Ball has a pretty extensive injury history too when it comes to this, so that would worry me. Everyone else in that kind of 40-something range worries me. There's Domantas Sabonis at 43.6. The fit in theory seems great next to Zion Williamson, but I don't know if he's a winning player. I really don't know if he's a winning player. And the more that I've watched him this year and thought about him, and then look at the lack of impact in the play-in tournament and those sorts of things, that kind of worries me there about what he can overall do to help impact you winning games. But CJ in the 6th pick could kind of be that full send moment you need to be like, we're going to go for it next year. We'll get DeJounte Murray back healthy. And then boom, what does it look like? It hurts you long term. That 6th pick is a very long-term piece for New Orleans and something they need. But if you're trying to go for it, it's a bit of a short-sighted move, but one that at least, makes you competitive next season, assuming health in Zion Williamson being healthy and kind of Zion being on the team. But those are the names that I think if you're looking to make that kind of move are the names that would be out there for the Pelicans. So coming up next, Joe Dumars' introductory presser today, Tuesday, when you're listening to this, hopefully. Let's break down what we're expecting from that, some questions we have, those sorts of things, just kind of preview it. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel has given new customers an incredible way to get in on the action because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. And I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking your favorite team in the playoffs like the Oklahoma City Thunder or diving into player props from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. And after the game tips off, you haven't missed anything. You can combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins today. That's, again, FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Say hello. A lot of y'all do in the comments down below. Just say you're an everyday or whatever it is. Give me a comment down below. And while there's no postseason, no playoffs for the Pelicans, they're hopeful to get back in there soon. And this is becoming a very key offseason. What are they going to do around Zion Williamson? We're covering it all over at the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. Locked On Pelicans in your inbox. And you could win by subscribing. Between April 7, 2025 and April 30th, 2025, if you haven't subscribed before, you get a chance to win one of these amazing prizes. $2,500 Best Buy gift card, $300 to Game Time, or $200 to Fanatics. So get exclusive insight into free agency, draft coverage, and team updates delivered straight to your inbox. Join Locked On Pelicans for trusted coverage every single day. You can subscribe to enter by clicking the link in the description down below or just going to lockedondaily.com. So let's switch gears to Joe Dumars and the presser. Look, deciding on the future of CJ McCollum is going to be one of his first orders of business alongside Willie Green and David Griffin. But look, by all accounts and even people I've talked to within the team, they're keeping Willie Green. It sounds like they are, barring some sort of change, and you never know, and we'll get into something with that in the third segment. They're keeping Willie Green. I talked about it yesterday. I knew what the responses were going to be when I put out the call for questions on Twitter. Like, what do you want to hear about in the show? It's like that Willie Green is being fired. Can't say that because it looks like they basically chose Willie Green over David Griffin and are going to go with that. So, as we get into this Joe Dumars press conference, right? Winning the press conference is important, and I don't doubt that Joe Dumars will do that. And I think in this press conference, it's going to be a stark difference from the way that David Griffin speaks. There will be platitudes. There always are in this sorts of things. We want a team with toughness. We want a team that competes. We want a team that represents the city of New Orleans out there on the court. Like, you're going to get all of that stuff. That's something that David Griffin would say. That's literally something every GM says. But I think you're going to get less corporate speak. And I think you're going to kind of feel like Joe Dumars is like, just shooting you straight, kind of telling you like it is to a degree. I don't know if he actually is or not, TBD, but I think you're going to hear a stark difference in kind of the way that they both speak. And I think that's something that maybe is needed, just a literal, like, fresh voice, different voice, like in the most literal sense, kind of delivering some of the things here. I would imagine we'll get some clarity on Willie Green and that he will say Willie Green is safe. I'm going to be curious if Willie Green is there or not. I would imagine he would be. And we'll see what Joe Dumars says about Willie Green, but I would imagine it's going to be a show of support saying like, yeah, we're keeping Coach Green. We believe in him. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. We don't think he's shown his full, potential as a coach, and we're excited to see what he does with a healthy roster and a roster maybe with more toughness and all of that stuff. There might be a question about the mandates potentially from ownership, but I would expect that he is going to deflect that question and just basically say like, no, there were no mandates. It's not that ownership, said I had to keep Willie Green even if I don't, want to keep him. But he's going to just say, like, I want to keep Willie Green. And he's going to try and take ownership of that, whether that's truthful or not. When it comes to Zion Williamson, I'm curious if Zion's going to be there or not. He was at the press conference introducing DeJounte Murray this past offseason. He's been more engaged, we've seen. Will he show up here knowing that, those rumors around him being traded away and that ownership is done with him is very loud right now? I would imagine that Joe Dumars is not going to make a declarative statement of we are trading away Zion Williamson or that ownership wants him gone. If he does, my mind will be blown, because the fact that they've allowed that to leak out in the sense that it is already is wild to me, because it hurts the trade value. If you know that the team wants to trade him, you're going to not offer as much, right? You're going to be like, you're going to play kind of a game of chicken in a sense and be like, yeah, all right, cool, keep him since you don't want him, right? Or lower your asking price for him. And look, we don't know exactly what his value is around the league. And as I've asked people, there's a very big range. Some people think he could get something. Some say the value isn't that much because of all of the games he's missed. And for all the reasons that the team wants to trade him away, whether it's the off-court stuff, the lack of games and all that, opponents know that. Not opponents, but like other teams know that, right? So you're not going to hear Joe Dumars do anything more to compromise their position here. He will not say that he's trading him or that it's mandated, because again, that would kill the trade value. I'd be willing to bet he is going to say something like, yeah, I want to connect with Zion. I want to kind of see if he wants to be here and what the future looks like when it comes to all of that. I think we'll hopefully be able to get some more clarity on the direction that this team wants to go in. He put out, and I talked about it on the show, of, a team built on toughness, discipline, all those things. And look, none of those words really describe Zion Williamson, but also what GM coach wouldn't want those type of qualities on their team. That's why I think, it's platitudes at times when it comes to it. So, I don't think we're going to get like the clear declarative answers that people are hopeful when it comes to this press conference, right? I think I would imagine he's going to say, like, we're going to evaluate the staff, the rest of the front office. Those people have contracts for another year. So maybe they don't want to fire those people, have to pay them, and then hire all new people and go kind of cheap. But also, you've had someone like Bryson Graham do a really good job drafting. And as someone who's not a particularly good drafter in Joe Dumars, maybe that's someone that he wants to keep. And hopefully they're making moves to be able to kind of shore all that stuff up, while also probably bringing in some people that he wants to. So I wonder if we'll get an idea of how the rest of the front office is shaking out and what that's going to look like going forward with this team too. But I don't expect there to be fireworks or this to be like which we'll talk about in the next segment, like a Nico Harrison press conference where you're just like, what the heck just happened there when it comes to all of this. I think they're still feeling things out. And while they probably have more of an idea of what they're going to do than they are letting on, because clearly this has been in the works for a while to hire Joe Dumars and move on from David Griffin. So it's not like Dumars got hired literally last Wednesday and was like, well, now I got to figure out what to do. There's some more planning behind the scenes here, at least from that perspective with everything. So I think that stuff will come out, as I can tell you, in time here. And again, I think tomorrow's going to be pretty tame. I think when you go into these press conferences and people expect fireworks and stuff, like, you just don't get those kind of answers from these, right? Nico Harrison was asked literally by Locked On Mavs host Isaac Harris, like, why shouldn't you be fired? And what do you think his answer is going to be? I think I do a good job. I think I've done a good job. You can't evaluate it yet, right? Like, a lot of the questions that people want asked, like, just don't get you the answers that you want at these sorts of things. And so, if it's like, why are you keeping Willie Green? The answer is going to be, I think he's a good head coach, right? Like, that's all they're going to say to that. It's not going to be this kind of deeply revealing thing that you are hopeful for. So keep that in mind, that when this plays out, they're going to say the safe, the smart thing. And it's going to be a lot of that. And you can still win a press conference that way. And hopefully that they're capable of doing that, because this hire, I think, has been a little bit controversial, to put it mildly, especially when you look at like the process of it. And it's funny because the process with let me see if I can find it, with the Atlanta Hawks is very, very different here, right? Like, did I retweet it or I got to find it here? The Atlanta Hawks announced they had fired their GM and they said, we've hired a consultant. We're going to do a wide-ranging search to kind of find the right person here for all that. So that's worth keeping in mind when it comes to that and the difference here from what the Pelicans have done. So I don't think you're going to get a lot of the answers that you want at the press conference. And it's like trying to hold their feet to the fire. It's not going to do anything. They're not going to give any sort of revealing answer, just like Nico Harrison and everything he said is not giving really any revealing answer. That just tends to not be how these things work. Speaking of Nico Harrison, I got a quote from y'all or for y'all that he said, which blows my mind, but gave me an interesting idea here. We'll look at that. We'll look Cooper Flagg. I want to get into Yves Missi for a little bit too. We've got a whole lot coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter too. And don't forget about Locked On Saints. It's draft week. You got to be listening to Locked On Saints to know what the Saints are going to do in this draft. Is there a QB at 9? Are they going to trade back up? We're hearing some rumors about that. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, has you all covered. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make them your second listen today. I'm gonna read you a quote from Nico Harrison at his end of season media availability after the secret media availability. The whole thing's a freaking weird disaster here. But this quote is wild to me. Right? This is something that I actually think is more important for franchises than they realize. And the quote is, quote, "I did know Luka was important to the fan base. I didn't know quite to this level," end quote. That is one of the most just flames coming out the side of my head, the Clue reference with that, right? That he's been the GM since 2001, 4 years. And traded Luka in 2005. What sort of dirt do you have your head buried in if that is the way that you think about Luka Doncic and just not know your fan base a little bit, right? Look, winning's important, but also keeping your fans happy and engaged is important too. Otherwise, these teams don't exist. It's kind of as simple as that. And to kind of not do right by the fan base is interesting. It got me an idea of, like, do all NBA teams have the right kind of read on their fan base, pulse of their fan base? And if not, they should be doing something like that. I'm not saying that person needs to work in the front office and that you should like run trades by fans or something like that to see if it's going to be wildly unpopular, right? You know, and often it's going to be mixed. You know, you might think that everyone hates Willie Green, but they don't. I can tell you, I see the comments far more places than you do. And I think there's more of a mixed reaction to Willie Green than a lot of people think. There might be a more vocal side of that, but certainly I think there's more people than you realize that support Willie Green in the fan base. You know, same with Zion Williamson. It seems at times 50-50 if they should trade him or not. And, you know, all the players and that kind of stuff. But having a sense of the fan base is pretty important, right? And I've seen a lot of people saying like Gail Benson ownership's giving the finger to fans by, you know, not firing Willie Green and by keeping Willie Green. I don't think it quite works like that, though. I think when it comes to Willie Green, it's definitely probably like 70% want him gone. Not necessarily a reason to fire a coach, but it's something to keep in mind that when your fans are very, very upset, do you need to do something for them or keep them in mind? And I think having someone that works for a team that kind of understands that, if, you know, maybe not like one person's sole job, but having someone that kind of hopefully reads the room well seems like a very smart thing to do. And I think the Pelicans are going through some of that a little bit right now. All right, more other news here. Cooper Flagg declared for the NBA draft. Anyone who was like, oh, maybe he'll stay, he shouldn't go to the, he was always going to go pro, regardless of who ended up with the #1 overall pick. There's too much money at stake. The everydayers have heard the show that I did that kind of looks at the money that he could be making over the course of his career. And that was like the main reason why. Is he going to leave something like $75 million on the table by not going pro sooner? I don't think so. And it's also not just that. It's not just the money. It's you want, you know, he's a hyper competitive guy. Like that's the type of player you want on your team that just does all the things right, has the right mentality on all that. He wants to get to the NBA and compete at the highest level. You could dominate college for another year. That sounds fun. Or go test yourself, push yourself further at the NBA level. And I think that is something that he definitely is looking to do, that he wants to do. He was always going to go pro no matter what. Just means, yeah, the number 1 overall pick, if you land that, is insanely valuable this year when it comes down to it. All right. Other news here before we start to wrap up the show a little bit. No rookie of the year for Yves Missi. Really kind of fell out of the race as the season went on and other players were playing more minutes, and Yves Missi kind of being limited with self-creation and some of the things that he can do. It's kind of what I expected. I did not think he was going to win rookie of the year. Earlier in the season, I did a show saying he won't win rookie of the year, but maybe he could finish third. He's not in the top 3 at all. They released the finalists for awards. He is not on the top 3 for rookie of the year. So he might get some votes in there, but clearly not enough if you're not even finishing in the top 3. I think he has a good chance to make one of the all-rookie teams, probably should make one of the 2 all-rookie teams, but I think you see he still has a long way to go. Credit to him for just doing what he could this season in an unfortunate spot, probably thrown in a little bit too early, but played very admirably, I thought, over the course of the year when it came down to it for everything. But no Rookie of the Year award for Yves Missi here when it comes down to it. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I will be at the press conference for Joe Dumars. Let's do a live show tomorrow night. I'll schedule it. Go click the link on the YouTube page when it comes down to it, because we are going to be covering it all here on Locked On Pelicans, and there's a whole lot more stuff coming. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join the newsletter. Don't forget about Locked On Saints as your second listen today. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See you all tomorrow.